सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Do we need to bother about the politicians who just passed away? Irrespective of whether we like their politics or not, we would have voted for them or not, or how polarized they were or they were not. Do we really care? Now the fact is that Cut The Clutter is reaching almost its 1100th episode, and I don't remember or any that we might have dedicated in full to a politician just passed away. So why are we doing this for Mulayam Singh Yadav? He was 82. He had been around for a long time. For almost a decade now, he wasn't that active and that relevant. Also, he was a very polarizing politician. There was plenty wrong with Mulayam Singh Yadav's politics, and a lot will disagree or argue with whatever we say about him. But the fact is, none of this will change the fact that he was a fascinating political leader. He played a very central and very important role in shaping India's politics 1989 onwards. Why do we say 1989 onwards? Because that's when India's politics took a fundamental shift. Until then, India's politics were all Congress, Congress, Congress. But remember, the government that went out in 1989, Rajiv Gandhi's government, was the last Congress government that had a full majority. After that, it took how long? It took 25 years for another government to get a full majority. That was Narendra Modi's in 2014. And one of the key factors to that breakup of Congress party's vote banks that led to the end of Congress party's majority era or epoch was Mulayam Singh Yadav. Because among the things that he did in the Hindi heartland is he took away the Muslim vote in the state of UP from the Congress party. Muslim vote, and he had his Yadav vote. Many of them by default voted for Congress or for the other so-called secular parties, but he took it away, and in his wake, Lalu also took it away in Bihar. And that's why, while we keep saying that 1989 on, one question has defined India's politics, which is, can you use religion to unite what caste divided, or can you use caste to divide what religion united? So Mulayam Singh was one of those central players 1989 onwards who was able to use caste to divide a religion, which is the Hindu vote. And as that happened, because he had the Muslims voting with him, he was able to keep the BJP out of power and often be in power himself directly, sometimes in partnership, and also keep several of the anti-BJP governments in power and several of the secular governments in power, mainly on the premise of keeping the communal BJP out of power. This could be Gauda's government, Gujarat's government, after that the two UPA governments, none of which could have survived without Mulayam's support or without Mulayam getting a bunch of parliament seats from Uttar Pradesh. He also became Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. We know that. Now his legacy, that's why I say he's been one of the most central political characters in our politics and power play. He's also been fascinating in some ways more than many others, and that I will tell you some stories and I will explain some of that to you as we go ahead. But remember, he also leaves a very dodgy legacy behind, because when he was in power for the longest time, his name got associated with heavy criminalization of the politics in UP. Also with patronage of mafia. Some of that continued on in Mayawati's time also. And UP for a long time acquired this image of complete lawlessness where people could be kidnapped just like that for ransom, and government and the police not only will not do anything about it, but they would look complicit with these mafias, and they were complicit with these mafias. So it was that image of deep criminalization in UP and the deep and strong, inseparable, unbreakable politician mafia nexus that still persists. And that's one of the reasons why Yogi Adityanath's BJP won a second big mandate in Uttar Pradesh, which rarely happens, in spite of the fact that there were many problems and grievances that people had on the ground, because ultimately people voted for law and order. People said, whatever it is, now mafia does not run our lives as it did during the period of Mulayam Singh Yadav. So that is one of his nastiest legacies. There is some more of that. He also had a coarse style of politicking, and I can give you a story on that, a story that I documented while he was around. I wrote about it, I spoke about it. It was also published in a 2012 national interest article. That 2000 national interest article was written because that was the time when he had started very strongly supporting Manmohan Singh II's economic policies. And that's when they were talking about FDI in multi-brand retail, etc. And he was supporting all of that. And people said, has he gone nuts? He's the last of the Lohiites. He's a socialist. Why is he supporting this reform economics? Has he lost it? Is he drinking and smoking something he should not? Or is he just so afraid of CBI, ED, etc.? Remember, CBI, ED were also misused by that government, particularly against Hindi heartland politicians. And that was the reason that 2012 article was written. And I had mentioned a particular story, incident in that article. And this was again something that in a way pertained to criminalization of politics and also his own rough and coarse method. So 2004, summer of 2004, I was the editor of Indian Express. Our office was in Qutb Institutional Area, extreme south of Delhi, and my phone rang one afternoon and I picked it up, looked like an unknown UP number. I picked it up and the voice at the other end said, "मैं मुलायम सिंह यादव बोल रहा हूँ." And it was a very angry Mulayam Singh Yadav. And he said, देखिए, मैं आगरा में हूँ, मेरे परिवार में मेरे रिश्तेदारों के घर में किसी की मृत्यु हो गई है, एक नौजवान की मृत्यु हो गई है. आपकी एक पत्रकार यहाँ घूम रही हैं, उनका नाम तवलीन सिंह है. तवलीन, एज यू नो, इज अ कॉलमनिस्ट एट द एक्सप्रेस. उनका नाम तवलीन सिंह है. वो कुछ उल्टी सीधे बातें ढूंढ रही हैं मेरे भतीजे के बारे में. शी इज लुकिंग फॉर सम मक ऑन द डेथ ऑफ माई नेव्यू. उनको कहिए वापस चले जाएं. शी शुड गो बैक, नहीं तो उनकी टांगे मांगे कोई तोड़ देगा, तो उसमें मेरी जिम्मेवारी नहीं है. सो if she persists with this, if somebody breaks her legs or something, don't blame me, I will not be responsible. So I was taken aback and I said, Mulayam Singh ji, देखिए, पत्रकार है, she is a journalist, she has the right to do what she is doing and she will do what she is doing. You remember that you are the chief minister of your state, and under our constitution, the chief minister of a state is responsible for law and order. So you are responsible for her safety and you will be accountable if something goes wrong with her or any harm comes to her. All of your disclaimers, फिर मुझे मत पूछना कोई टांगे तोड़ देगा, all of that will not work. So we had this very sharp exchange. I was still reeling from it, that within 3 or 4 minutes, the phone rang. It was again a UP number, but a different number. So I again picked up the phone and he said, भाई मैं शेखर जी, मैं मुलायम सिंह यादव बोल रहा हूँ. And now he sounded very, very calm. And then he said, I'm very sorry, मुझे क्षमा कीजिए, मुझे ऐसे नहीं बोलना चाहिए था, ऐसे कुछ नहीं होगा, आपके संवाददाता भी यहाँ सुरक्षित रहेंगे, कोई उन्हें कुछ नहीं कहेगा. Then nothing will happen to your correspondent, she'll be safe, and I'm sorry I spoke to you about this, I apologize to you. Now I wasn't quite used to the chief minister of a state, that too chief minister of the great state of Uttar Pradesh, and then again a chief minister with a reputation like Mulayam Singh, coarse, rough, linked with mafias, etc., take no prisoners, etc., etc. So once again I was taken aback and we concluded that conversation. Later that year, I think in November, we were launching the edition of the Indian Express in Lucknow. And as usually happens, there is an event for the launch where Chief Minister comes. To give the event some character, we had also hosted the play Tumhari Amrita by Shabana Azmi and Farooq Sheikh. They were there too. This was at the Taj in Lucknow. And Mulayam Singh came there as chief guest and he spoke there. And he said, look, I was very busy, but when this request came, I decided to still come for this function because there is a history between me and the editor of the Indian Express. And then he put aside his written text for this speech, and then he recounted in front of the audience in his capital city that entire incident of his phone call to me and then threat and the apology, etc., etc. And then he also, typical of the old-fashioned clever politician, said, I am so grateful to this gentleman, that's me, that he accepted my apology. Now that is when I also understood that he is everything negative that is said about him, no doubt about that. But he is also a consummate politician, a really old-fashioned, pakka politician with a very thick skin. And that showed out in that incident. Now think about it, a senior politician, senior powerful politician saying sorry after such a rude exchange and then recounting it a few months later. This was the period, this was the George Bush period. You are against us or with us. And this was becoming the culture then in the entire political system in India as well. And then we saw other sides to him also. He, for example, obviously under the influence of Amar Singh in that case, invited Bill Clinton, after he had ceased to be president, must have paid him the top dollar to come for an event in Lucknow, and where of all things he had Shamak Davar's troupe come and perform at the event. So this was a man with many sides to him. Now I had written some stuff about him in that 2012 article, and you know what? I'm sharing that article with you. Just change the tense in those articles. It looked like an obituary on Mulayam Singh Yadav. In fact, I had then said, and that's a question that assails me even now, had he gone gaga? Was he acting in dread of the CBI? Had he, the most successful of old Lohiites, become a latter-day convert to Manmohanomics? The answer, as I concluded then, was none of the above, because Mulayam was the most political of India's senior politicians. He did have his beliefs and ideology, so he wasn't entirely cynical. A lot of what he said and did came from his ideology. However, I might agree with it. I think, for example, that Lohiaism was the worst kind of socialism, because Lohiaism also combined a very, very sharp nativism and a very sharp sense of nationalism. That is a bad combination. That is deep socialism, deep nationalism, and deep nativism. That is a bad combination, and he was a believer in all that. So his ideology did inform his actions often, so he wasn't fully cynical, but he just had the sharpest sense of what worked for his politics. His open, accessible, thick-skinned style was an added asset. He was one of the last regional heavyweights in our politics to embody those old world values where you never stop talking with anybody, particularly those you disagree with, and vice versa. He also knew his limitations better than many others like him who got muddled up trying to punch above their weight, not Mulayam. That is why you had never seen him make a maximalist demand or give ultimatums. He negotiated, believed in give and take, often gave more than he took, but always got a deal. And I know I could be risking an internet meltdown. A lot of people will get angry with me, but I have to also add that he was a deeply patriotic Indian. In fact, sometimes hyper-patriotic and xenophobic, which came from his Lohiite training, because that's how old Lohiites tend to be. Remember, the first Indian politician to warn the country about China, and the politician who was the most concerned about China and the most concerned about Tibet and had spoken about it in London even before India became independent was Ram Manohar Lohia. It's a famous speech. Among our wonderfully diverse pantheon of powerful regional leaders, Mulayam was the least complex or self-conscious. Of course, he wasn't perfect. He was far from perfect. No politician is perfect. I should speak from some first-person experience, which I just mentioned to you, the Agra Tabreen story, because I did fight with him once quite rudely, and having disagreed and argued with him editorially often enough. Mulayam might have inherited his ideological worldview from Ram Manohar Lohia, but in politics, he was the most loyal pupil of Comrade Harkishan Singh Surjit of the CPM, I'm talking of Surjit, who, while he held his ideology close to his heart, was one of our most inclusive, I would say, politicians ever. He had friends on all sides, never treated anybody as persona non grata, and loved being a problem solver. It was only his genius, Surjit's genius, that put together the United Front government in 1996-97. Remember, Deve Gowda became Prime Minister. And after that, I had a Walk the Talk interview with Surjit where I asked him, you made Deve Gowda the Prime Minister? And so he said, yes, I wanted Mulayam to be the Prime Minister, but that didn't work out. And he explained to me how it didn't work out. But I said, Gowda, who knew him? And then he said, look, anybody can be Prime Minister of India. He wasn't such a bad Prime Minister. So I'm giving you an example of how pragmatic a politician Surjit was. This after his own party had denied the Prime Ministership to Jyoti Basu, their own leader, and it was his for the asking, but for the party stopping him. Now, Surjit was thwarted in his effort to install his favorite Mulayam as the Prime Minister, but in a rare disclosure, he had told me in that Walk the Talk interview on NDTV that an internal vote was taken in what was then to be the United Front. Mulayam in that internal vote had beaten Moopanar. Moopanar had by this time broken away from the Congress party and set up Tamil Maanila Congress. So Mulayam had beaten Moopanar 120 to 20 in that vote. That's about as many seats that UF had. The rest was support from Congress, etc., from outside. So he had beaten Moopanar, Mulayam had beaten Moopanar 120 to 20. But Surjit suggested that while Mulayam might have won that vote, the rival Yadavs, that is Lalu Yadav and Sharad Yadav, orchestrated by, as he said, our friend Chandrababu Naidu, had sabotaged it. And if they hadn't, that coalition would have lasted a bit longer than under Gujral. That is how close Mulayam had come to becoming Prime Minister in 1997. Mulayam's admiration from Surjit was even greater. He said publicly that Surjit would have understood why he supported UPA 1 on the nuclear deal, and in fact, had he been alive, the left would not have broken away the way it did in 2008 and would have enjoyed another 5 years of power with UPA 2. Okay, Mulayam was cynical, but he was also cleverer than the competition. He knew his essential politics was rooted in his state's approximately 5 crore Muslims. Then he was, as a matter of fact, Indian Muslims' most important leader. And one of the reasons why a bigoted, sectarian and exclusivist Muslim leadership has not emerged in India, particularly in the Hindi heartland, in the Indian political heartland. With many others, including Nitish Kumar, Mamta Banerjee, and even Mayawati learning from him, he made sure there was no vacuum left that Muslim voters might have wanted a more fundamentalist leadership to fill. That is the reason PFI would not have won any major elections in India or would have got the Muslim vote in any major election in India. But unlike the left, his idea of secularism was not godless. He proudly called himself a Hanuman Bhakt, like most of his fellow wrestlers would. Mulayam, by the way, was trained to be a wrestler, bantamweight, I think. He was a professional wrestler, and in fact, I first saw him on the pages of India Today magazine in 1982, 83 or thereabouts, when my colleague Chaitanya Kalbag had gone to do a story on the dacoits of Chambal. That is when Mulayam Singh Yadav had become a kind of human rights activist, fighting for the cause of people arrested on the charge of being dacoits or people killed in dodgy encounters. That is when he burst on the national scene. Of course, he was a political activist. He went to jail during the emergency, but he grew up as a wrestler in the village Akhada. And some of that method did not leave him. So my first longish conversation with him was at Safai, at his village, when I had gone to record first of my 3 episodes of Walk the Talk with him. And there, that meal became a tutorial on heartland politics. He underlined where it differed from the classical left view of political utopia. And there he explained how it differed from the classical left view of a political utopia free of caste and religion. If you take out caste, religion, clan, jati, dharam, biradri, he said, then politics would become totally cruel because you will take all these softer elements out of it. That was his explanation. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it. I told you right up that he was one of our most polarizing figures. You could either agree with him strongly or disagree even more strongly. But his exact line was, आप इसमें से सब निकाल दें धर्म, जाति, परिवार वगैरह राजनीति से, तो राजनीति क्रूर हो जाएगी. Accordingly, though he has always been derided by rivals, particularly the BJP as Maulana Mulayam, he had a less cliched view of Muslims than others, particularly the left. Proof when the left led the anti-nuclear deal campaign, suggesting that anybody who had any expectation or any hope of getting the Muslim vote should not back the deal, should oppose the deal, because Muslims don't like it or Muslims don't like America. Mulayam went exactly the other way. He not only voted for the deal, he spoke aggressively for the deal. That he wasn't being daft was proved subsequently, as his Muslim vote bank first gave him more seats than Mayawati in the Lok Sabha 2009. Remember, Mayawati then had joined hands with the left and the BJP to try and bring down the UPA government. So he got more seats and more Muslim votes than Mayawati in 2009, and then an unprecedented clear majority in the assembly in 2012. And meanwhile, the left lost its Muslims and West Bengal. Indian Muslims, Mulayam Singh Yadav would always say in one-on-one conversations and also in interviews, are like all other patriotic Indians. They want security from communal elements and things that everybody wants anyway. Water, power, schools, hospitals, jobs. He was the only old custodian of a vote bank to understand that Indian Muslims would not put their anti-Americanism above their Indian nationalism. That Surjit would have agreed to. If Surjit was around, he always insisted the left would never have walked out of UPA 2. Mulayam was too clever to allow any emotion, anti-Congressism, to color his political judgment. That is why you did not find him sharing the stage anywhere with the BJP at any time. While his old CPM friends broke that self-imposed law in anger, they joined hands with the BJP twice, in fact, to try and bring down UPA. Once over the nuclear deal and second over FDI in multi-brand retail. Mulayam knew his Muslim voters worry about Modi and BJP, not about America. And yet, socially and politically, he would never treat BJP leaders as untouchable or in certain other interesting circumstances. So my favorite story, which I once recorded in a national interest more than 15 years ago, concerns the Sukhoi 30 deal, which was spread between four governments, Rao, Vajpayee, Gowda, Gujral. So four governments. The deal was consummated between four governments in quick successions. That had the markings of a first-rate scam and controversy. Very briefly, Narasimha Rao had signed the deal during the 1996 election campaign in India as a caretaker prime minister and paid Russia an advance of $365 million even before any agreements had been initialed. And early on, the BJP cried havoc the moment Amitabh Ranjan of the Indian Express broke the story. Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Jaswant Singh, then in the opposition, met us and asked if the paper actually thought there was a scam, because if there wasn't one, they did not want to damn a good fighter plane like the unfortunate Bofors gun. Now, Vajpayee came into power shortly afterwards. His tenure lasted only 13 days, and then came H.D. Deve Gowda with Mulayam Singh Yadav as defense minister. It was several months later that Jaswant Singh mentioned in a casual conversation that he and Vajpayee had been invited by Mulayam to sit in on a presentation on the Sukhoi deal to see if anything was wrong. Mulayam even accepted the modifications they subjected in the contract, including a sovereign Russian guarantee that there was no kickbacks, and should any surface later, Moscow would reimburse Delhi fully. Of course, they also discovered the reason why Rao and Manmohan Singh as his finance minister had paid that totally arbitrary advance even before an agreement was signed. $365 million today may not look such a big amount, but in 1996 was a fortune even for a sovereign nation of India's size. The reason was because the Sukhoi factory was broke, it was unable to pay salaries, and the factory was located in Boris Yeltsin's constituency, and he too was facing elections. And so, wouldn't he appreciate that very special favor of India paying the advance early so the factory could pay salaries, so he could go to his voters and say, "Dekha, maine aapki salaries dilwa di." Politicians think the same way all over the world. I confronted Mulayam Singh subsequently at a dinner at the IAF mess on Delhi's Zakir Hussain Marg when he was defense minister, and asked if it was true that he had indeed reached out to the top leadership of the BJP. He so detested. He just smiled in a childlike delight and said, "हाँ, बुलाया हमने, किसी को पता नहीं चला, मीडिया फेल हो गया, फेल नहीं." Just as they said Faisal, not Faisal in Gangs of Wasipur. He said, media fail ho gaya. Now, what does this little episode from fairly recent political history do if not underline Mulayam Singh Yadav's patriotism? Also, an open-minded pragmatism which is in such short supply in today's bitter them versus us and issues be damned politics. Of course, there was plenty wrong with this politics. I told you, criminalization, mafias, casteism, crudity of politics, crudity and rudeness of political discourse, and there will always be a lot in his legacy that we'll disagree with. But that will not change the fascinating political player Mulayam was. And the one thing he wasn't was an enigma. He was 100% politician and therefore mostly predictable. As I told you earlier, he was no atheist. He in fact took pride in calling himself Hanuman Bhakt. And one of the things he left behind in the official bungalow that he was allotted as defense minister was a little temple to Lord Hanuman next to a tree. Arun Jaitley got that house, inherited that house after Mulayam Singh Yadav, and he let that temple be, and I'm sure that temple is still there, and that is also part of Mulayam Singh Yadav's legacy.